Yes, hello and thanks for joining me once again as we take a look at more of those vintage classics from the Westmoreland Golde Jubilee Scramble that was held at Westmoreland County Showground on the 26th and 27th of June. Now I hope you enjoyed all the bikes from the Saturday's race event, and many of the machines that you're just about to see mainly took part in Sunday's meeting. So we're going to kick off with part 2 of our In The Paddock from that event. Okay, and our first featured machine is Mark Beeston's KX125 Kawasaki, an absolutely stunning looking little twin shocker. Now I don't think that Mark's little quacker here is a fully original bike from back in the day, but nonetheless an absolutely stunning looking little 125 screamer. And this is just one of two bikes that Mark brought to this event. I remember him showing me his second machine. It was sitting in the back of his race van, and it was, I think it was in even better condition than this little bike, but this is still a beautiful little machine, and there's not too many of these old KX Kawasaki's going around these days, and this particular example of Mark's has certainly had the full bling treatment. I'm not entirely sure, but I think this could be a 1979 KX125, and I think these were called the A5s if my memory serves me correctly. And these 125 two-stroke Kawasaki motors had quite a good reputation for having a nice broad power band from back in the day, and these were very popular among 125 motocross racers at that time. These little KX125s had this gold anodized alloy rear swing arm, which was quite a strong piece of kit for such a little bike, but the overall weight of these KX125s I think were only around the 190 pounds mark, which was they say was 13 pounds lighter than the equivalent Honda CR125. Now I think these had Kayaba front forks, but I think these gave about 9 inches of travel at the front, but I don't think these are standard Kayaba forks on Mark's particular machine. And as I said, there's not too many of these little KX125s going around these days, and this example of Mark's is certainly a little beauty. So that's Mark Beeston's lovely 125 Kawasaki. Now, of course, we couldn't do a paddock video without mentioning Cecil Pearsons' very unique collection of Rickman Stitt Jap scramblers. Now, this particular bike here is a Harry Stitt framed machine with the 1930s John Alfred Presswitch engine in the chassis. Now these lovely frames are bespoke frames. These are one-off chassis built specifically to house these big 600 methanol burning 1930s Jap 4-stroke motors. Now this number 26 bike is a Rickman framed Jap scrambler. Now this is James Thompson's race bike, and look out for James racing this on the track in the coming racing footage. Now we can just see Cecil in the background there explaining to an interested party how these old Jap scramblers came about, but this is a very unique collection of machines. I don't think there's another collection like this even in Europe, and possibly even in the world, that there's not many people have 9 or even 10 of these Jap scramblers in their private collections. Now don't be fooled by the vintage look of these old racers. They may look like they've came from the early 1930s or 40s, but believe me, these machines are super quick on the racetrack, and of course you'll be able to see every one of these bikes in action on the track if you take a look at the racing footage, which will be posted on my YouTube channel soon. Now, because this was a Golden Jubilee Scramble celebrating 50 years of CCM racing, as you'd expect, there were a multitude of beautiful CCMs on display, and many of the bikes that you're looking at here belonged to one person, and Rob Hughes had brought a few of his lovely CCM bikes to this Westmoreland County Showground to let people have a look at these very unique machines. But Rob tells me that these are just a few of the many CCMs that he has in his collection. So I've already made arrangements to visit Rob's workshop and take some more videos and photos of these beautiful Allan machines. And of course, if you subscribe to my channel, then you will be able to see each and every one of these lovely bikes up close and personal here on Classic Dirt Bike TV. But the amount of CCM bikes that were in attendance at this lovely weekend of classic racing was just astounding, and these are just a quick glimpse of some of the beautiful Allan machines that were on display at the concourse event on the Saturday evening. And what better way to end a Saturday evening by having a couple of beers with like-minded motocross fans and taking a look at this fantastic collection of old CCM racers. Now, this particular bike here is of course a 4-stroke CCM with the Rotax motor in the chassis. Although I'm certainly looking forward to making the trip to Rob's Aladdin's Cave of CCM bikes and capturing these bikes on film for my YouTube subscribers. Now again, another nice CCM, and this number 76 bike belongs to John Cash, and you'll be able to see John racing this in the Sunday's racing footage, which I'll be posting quite soon. But a lovely collection of old classic CCMs, and I think there must have been about 30 bikes overall at this concourse judging competition. Now here we have another quite rare machine. This is Mike Barnes's 1972 Works CCM. Now this bike was originally built as a 600, but it was reduced to a 540 cc for the 1973 season. Now Mike Barnes actually broke his leg while riding this bike, and kind of mothballed his career for a while, but Mike still raced it again after the accident, but it effectively stopped his professional racing career. But a very rare bike, and nice to see it out and about again at this CCM racing event. Now once again, another rare machine. Now this is a 100% original 1975 CCM, which has been totally unmolested and still has every single part that was fitted to it back in 1975. I think the tyres are even still the original tyres from back in the day, and if you look at those Girling rear shocks, you can see that they still have the original CCM stickers that were placed on these shocks from that 1975 period. Now I don't have any details of where the bike came from or how it came about, but certainly the owner of this bike has certainly found a lovely time capsule, and these original CCMs can fetch good money even in this kind of condition, but it would be quite nice just to keep this bike exactly the way it is, and just a nice reference point from what one of these CCMs would have looked like way back in 1975. Of course, the casings on those engines from that period had this gold plating on the outside, and our particular bike still has a bit of paint in it, but what an absolute find of a machine, and all original from that 1975 period. Our next Allan Clues competition machine is Robert Lawrence's 4-valver CCM. And now Lawrence was telling me on the day that this bike suffered a bit of a fire in the engine department, and it was well gutted at one time, but as you can see, it's been put back to almost pristine condition, and Lawrence was looking forward to putting it back on the track and racing in the CCM races here at the Westmoreland County Showground. But of course, it's thanks to the late and great Allan Clues, who of course bought out all the BSA competition department surplus engines when BSA went down the toilet in the early 1970s, and Allan Clues developed this B50 engine to be put into a Scrambles frame. And of course, the first bikes that Allan ever produced were called the Clues Strokers. Everybody somehow seems to think that he started off with CCMs, but it wasn't. It was the Clues Stroker bikes that Allan first built, and then later registered the name CCM for Clues Competition Machines. But this is another nice example of one of Allan Clues' bikes, this lovely CCM from Lawrence. And of course, you can see this bike and many more of these CCMs in action coming soon in the racing footage. Now, once again, another fine example of a CCM, and this is Paul Dixon's Joe Maxwell Engineering CCM. Now, this is not an original bike from the 1970s, but is a reproduction machine, and Joe Maxwell Engineering is currently building all these frames and even the engines for these replica bikes. But nonetheless, it's still good to keep the old CCM name alive and keep seeing these bikes taking part in classic scrambles. Now, although these are reproduction CCM bikes, they're still in keeping with the original design that Allan Clues put together in the 1970s, and Joe Maxwell Engineering is also now building chassis for Allan Clues' original Clues Stroker design, and Joe Maxwell is quite a good outlet if you're looking to either purchase or maybe put together one of these lovely looking CCM machines. Now, many of these earlier CCMs, of course, were powered by the awesome BSA B50 4-stroke motor. Now, most of these engines had a 3-speed gearbox, but there were a couple of bikes that had the upgraded 4-speed gearbox, but these are still lovely looking machines, and this bike of Paul Dixon's is certainly a nice piece of kit, even although this is not an original bike but a reproduction unit. Now, during my Sunday stroll around the paddock, I came across this lovely KTM125 twin shocker belonging to Kevin Thornton. Now, this again is an extremely rare machine. You virtually never ever see these 125 KTM twin shockers at these kind of classic event, and this particular example here looks almost 100% original, and Kevin was telling me that this bike came from an owner in Germany. Now once again, I'm not entirely sure of the year of the bike, but it certainly looks like it could be a 1980 or even a 1981 bike, but quite a nippy little machine. I was watching this bike actually racing on the track on the Sunday, and Kevin was doing very well on it, and once again you can see this bike in action in the racing footage that will be following shortly. But a stunning looking time capsule from back in the day, and a very rare 125 little twin shocker. But these little KTM 125s, of course, the baby brother to the absolutely awesome and mighty 495 two-stroke KTM, which was an absolute brute of a machine, and I think KTM actually brought the 495 out to try and compete with the mighty 490 Myco. But Kevin's example here appears to have all the correct parts fitted on it from back in the day, and it's nice to see one of these little 125s once again, because as I mentioned, you just do not see these in racing paddocks or even taking part in racing these days. But this is a very nice and a very rare little gem. But again, just another one of the many fantastic bikes that were on display at this two-day event here at the Westmoreland County Showground. Okay, next up we're going to take a look at Sean Mccree's quite nice looking RM125 Suzuki. Now this of course is not an original machine, as Sean told me that this is made up from a mishmash of different Suzuki bikes, but this was all done to suit Sean's own personal taste, and it's very much a work in progress type of bike, but nonetheless a beautiful looking little machine, and Sean did quite well on this bike over the course of the Sunday's race programme. Now the fuel tank on that bike of course is not the standard Suzuki fuel tank. I think Sean was telling me that he made this fuel tank himself, alloy of course, and Sean made this particular tank just to suit the kind of bike that he was building, but a nice piece of engineering on that alloy fuel tank. Now I'm sure that Sean also told me that the forks and the rear swing arm were from different Suzuki models, but the most important thing is it still has drum brakes on the front and rear to make it twin shock eligible for this kind of racing. Now I quite easily could have spent at least another 2 days walking around the paddock at this Golden Jubilee event. Such was the amount of nice looking bikes that were in the paddock. Of course some of them weren't too accessible for taking pictures or video clips, but these few that I did capture were some of the lucky ones that I managed to grab over the course of the 2 days. But as you can see, even although it's not an original bike, a very nice looking little Suzuki, and there we can see Sean cheesing with his best smile to show off his lovely work of art on his Suzuki 125 twin shocker. Now another bike that I spotted on the Sunday was Andrew Rudkin's quite nice looking YZ250 Yamaha. Now again, another nice looking bike. I think this could be a 1980 or even a 1981 model, but as I keep saying, what do I know? I'm really guessing in that respect, but another very nice looking example of one of these pretty awesome YZ250s from that 1980s period. Now these YZ250s were of course made in this yellow colour, which was mainly for international sales to the USA, and the white liveried YZ250s were mainly for sale in Europe. Now, Andrew was racing this particular YZ250 in the twin shock 250 class. Now, these YZ Yamahas are eligible to race with the twin shock bikes due to the fact that they have no linkage in the rear suspension, and of course they still have drum brakes on the front and rear and an air cooled engine, so these are eligible to race alongside the twin shock bikes. But another nice looking Japanese YZ, that's Andrew Rudkin's 250. Now, this beautiful looking cotton EMC 250 is another one of the many bikes owned by Rob Hughes, who brought all those CCMs along to the event. Now, this is a fully restored EMC 250, and it's been immaculately done, and for me personally this was one of the nicest bikes that I captured over the course of the weekend. Now, EMC of course was the Cotton Etoff motocross components. That was of course their early name, and Mike Etoff had to later change the name to Cotton EMX due to the fact that some other company was using the EMC abbreviation. Now, this particular bike is one of the rarer Cotton EMC 250s, powered by this German two-stroke Sachs engine. Other EMC 250 models were of course powered by Rotax motors, and I think there was about half a dozen bikes that were built using the 360 CZ Czechoslovakian engine. Although we will take a much closer look at this bike in a future video here on my Classic Dirt Bike TV channel, so look out for that. It's an absolutely gorgeous looking little machine and looks beautiful in that Westmoreland County Showground morning sunshine. Okay, from the little two-strokers to the big 500cc thumpers. This is Trevor Caldwell's 1983 500 TC Husqvarna 4-stroke machine. Now again, not a fully original bike, but this machine has more modern forks on the front and has a nice collection of trick parts fitted on it. But as you know, these 83 500 4-strokers were absolutely awesome bikes back in the day, and they're still quite popular as race bikes, but quite a heavy bike to throw around a racetrack. But nonetheless, if you want brute power, then these big 500 TCs certainly deliver. Now, as I said, this bike has upgraded front forks in it, or possibly from a more modern machine, and that brake backplate anchor bolted onto the fork leg looks quite substantial. But you don't need me to tell you how good these big, massive 500 TC 4-stroke motors are. The twin port cylinder head that go into the twin tailpipes at the rear, but an awesome piece of kit, these big 4-stroke motors. Now, some people say they're maybe not the easiest of motors to get fired up, but when they do get running, these engines have more than enough grunt for even the fastest of riders. But a nice alloy billet rear brake pedal on this bike, and a nice pair of steel upgraded footrests. Now, this brake backplate of course is not the original one, but this has been a CNC machined replacement that Trevor's fitted to his big Husqvarna. But it's still quite a nicely turned out machine. It still has the original 1983 alloy wheels, but there you can see those twin tailpipes running down either side of the motor. A single cylinder engine, of course, but with a twin port cylinder head, and it's quite easy when you come up behind this bike to know exactly what make and model of machine that you're following when you see these two big massive cannons sticking out at the back of this big Husky. Now the triple clamps, of course, are different from the original 83 bike, and Trevor's also fitted a nice pair of bar risers there to make the riding position more comfortable. But a nice set of YSS piggyback rear shocks on Trevor's machine, and these YSS suspensions are top of the range and will be able to cope with anything that this big four-stroke comes up against. But certainly a well turned out big four-stroke thumper, and this big 83 Husqvarna is of course just one of the many bikes that Trevor has in his collection of bikes at home in Northern Ireland, and hopefully we'll be able to see this bike taking part in the Sunday's race event. Okay, just to finish off this second paddock video from the Westmoreland Motor Club's 2D event, we're going to take a look at Dean Pennington's RM250 Suzuki. Now once again, this is a bike unlike many other RM250 Suzukis. Still powered of course by that quite nice 250 reed valve motor, fueled of course by that Japanese Mccree carburetor. Now an extra big alloy fuel tank on this particular bike, and I'm sure that this is from some kind of Suzuki Enduro bike, but nevertheless a lovely piece of alloy with that Suzuki emblem on the side. But you have to say it's a much nicer looking fuel tank than the more mundane yellow plastic fuel tanks of other RM Suzukis, and it's a nice piece of sculpture, this alloy tank in its own right. But certainly an unusual size of fuel tank for a little RM250, but I'm assuming that this is a larger tank for maybe a Suzuki Enduro model. But again, these RM250 motors were good little engines back in the day, and I think this is still one of the older piston port motors. I don't think this has got any reed valve to speak of, but fed its fuel by that quite big Mccree carburetor, which, if my memory serves me correctly, was the kind of carburetor that was fitted to these Suzukis back in the day. But reference there to Crooks Suzuki. Remember that company, established away back in 1960 by ex-road racer Eddie Crooks, and I think they were originally called Eddie Crooks Suzuki, and at that time they were agents for selling Triumph and Greaves motorcycles, but eventually they were the first ever dealers in Britain to start selling all manner of Suzuki motorcycles, and in fact I think they still trade today, servicing all kinds of Suzuki motorbikes. Although over the course of the 2 days at this Westmoreland Golden Jubilee weekend, there were literally hundreds of lovely looking machines, and unfortunately I never managed to capture each and every one of them, but these are just a few of the lucky bikes that I managed to film over the course of the 2 days. Now I hope you've enjoyed both videos from the paddock from this event. Now don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you want to see all the racing from this event, which will be coming up here on my YouTube channel quite soon. Certainly worth a watch if you were not at this event. But once again, thanks for taking the time to watch my video content, and we'll speak again very soon when we all return to Classic Dirt Bike TV.